Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, thank you, David, for the excellent opening presentation and teed up some of the points I was going to discuss nicely, so I can cut them out of mine and reduce the time I'm talking. Before we kick off, just want to thank you to Dan and the team for putting on this fantastic event and convening us all here today, and also giving the opportunity to speak on some of the work we're doing. This will be a little bit of a showcase of an initiative that we are running, but also hopefully share some of the insights behind that initiative, and ultimately a call to action for some opportunities for people in the room to engage with beyond today. Unfortunately, I will be presenting this on a panel, then I have to jump on a flight to South Africa, but Dan will share all of my contact details and information so you can follow up directly if we don't get a chance to speak. But yeah, hopefully look forward to connecting with some of you virtually. As David mentioned, we're here to talk about the UK-Africa corridor. We're here in London, one of the leading ecosystem hubs outside of the continent for African founders, startup scale-ups in the venture ecosystem. And it's one that I'm very bullish on. For those who don't know me, I'm Anthony Catt, and I'm the founder of Ventures 54 and our non-profit arm V54 Open Impact. And I've been working in the UK-Africa Tech Corridor since 2015 when I first did some ecosystem development work in Sudan, and I'm now based between London and South Africa. And what we do at Ventures 54 is very simple. We look to be the glue, the intersection between the UK and several African markets for the tech, venture capital, startup and scale-up ecosystem. And this is working with government, private sector investors and founders on how do we better build those bridges, whether that be African funds accessing capital markets in London, African scale-ups accessing UK market for various reasons, but also more recently working with UK scale-ups to access opportunities on the continent, and working then as a layer with government to better capacity enable those type of initiatives. And what I'm here today to talk to you about is a little about our UK Africa Sandbox initiative, which is enabling and supporting and capacitating some of those activities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what opportunity we see within the UK, as well as some of the challenges and how we're trying to solve for some of that, and then some of the activities we have coming up across the year that might be relevant for you to engage from various different stakeholder lenses. So first, the opportunity. I mean, David briefly touched upon it, and I want to get some updated slides and some data he shared last year that created a lot of interesting debates around domiciling overseas and raising capital. But a couple numbers that have been fairly consistent the last couple of years around the opportunity. London's been the #1 destination for African founders to be domiciled abroad. US is the largest market for it, but at a city level, London has historically been that #1 city. And then the UK is only second, London is only second to the US for capital raising. So we're right up there from an offshoring perspective, capital raising perspective, a home off the continent in various shapes or forms for African ventures. And through the work we do, we probably speak to about 500 scale-up founders from across the continent coming to us from venture capital funds in their portfolio. And we see at least 5 to 10% of those looking for access and engagement with the UK market, whether it be setting up a holdco, subsidiary, but to access capital, commercial opportunities, or even founders being offshore. And there's a real shift right now in the global ecosystem around where companies are looking for those offshore opportunities, which is leading to opportunities for the UK to really cement itself as the kind of go global partner for the ecosystem. In terms of why that's important now is with 90+% of capital really being in around the UK, Europe and US for companies, accessing that capital, as many as you will know, often when you have that holdco or that home on the continent can be restrictive or limited, particularly where we're trying to attract new investors into the ecosystem who may not already invest on the continent, needing to see those companies overseas. When we're getting to that later stage capital piece around the Series B+, that's where the capital ultimately is limited on the continent. So where we're seeing those large-scale rounds being raised, 50 million, 75 million, 100 million plus, that's often tied to African ventures going into other markets globally, and where we're seeing those large checks come from international investors who might not traditionally be seen as an Africa-focused fund is because they're helping with those companies to effectively go global. And obviously, naturally, coming off the continent and having a go global business affects valuation significantly and rises them up. So there is a real big driver for why these companies are coming offshore, not as a preference choice, but often as a necessity for that growth. And one of the big things we're obviously seeing with that as well is what is happening between the UK as a market, the US as a market, the Middle East as a market, and that attraction, and who is kind of primed to be in the position to kind of provide them the best support for that growth. In terms of the landscape itself, a lot of this will be obvious to you through social, economic, and political situations happening, but the US, which has traditionally been the home for African ventures and setting up, there's a shift, right? With the visa limitation restrictions, the US's kind of international development policy is becoming less of an attractive place and often a more difficult place now for these companies to set up, raise capital and access opportunities. Obviously, the real horrible things that are going on in the Middle East right now, whereas the UAE was becoming that kind of Middle Eastern hub, hopefully that's going to change in the medium term. But right now, that's obviously put a huge strain on that new attraction that they were bringing companies into the Middle East. And then we look at Singapore and Southeast Asia, where we have some real growth success stories. Is a bit more of a limitation due to the nature of the proximity of those markets and nature of those markets having less parities or comparisons to, say, the Europe, US, or the Middle East. And so this really leaves a prime opportunity for the UK. I think in the last couple of years, we've obviously had a lot of social economic challenges here at home, and the press hasn't done a very good job of presenting the UK overseas and abroad. But what really does remain true in our opinion and view is the UK is a prime home for African ventures in terms of the full support stack it does offer, and that we don't often tell the right story. But equally with some of our contemporaries in the US and the Middle East, there is an opportunity right now where less founders are looking towards those markets that we need to really lean in on. And some of the key reasons for that, first one's around SCIS, EIS, seed enterprise and enterprise investment schemes, which obviously provide a huge volume of tax breaks for investors and are probably one of the best early stage investment vehicles created globally. And particularly now with the enterprise investment scheme raising its cap to 30 million, it actually enables a lot more growth businesses. And you'll be amazed at how many companies and by extension funds on the continent are not aware of these tax incentives that really can drive that early stage growth for capital raising. Regulatory credibility just across several industries here. There is a huge base. It's easy for doing business, scaling those businesses in various different industries. London, by extension to UK, but London is that kind of number one city where a lot of African founders are coming, and the huge ecosystem that's here to support and capacitate them. And then also on the government side, we work extensively with government. And at the moment, there's been a lot of changes and reshuffles across the DBT and FCDO. But what we are seeing is a lot of alignment across departments for how do we support African ventures from that early stage to that scale and exit stage, and particularly engage and follow what the private sector is saying. And again, bringing all of those things together, we don't really see that happening on such a collective effort in other markets as we do in the UK. But there's equally challenges with that. I've been working now for a decade in this space and spending every day speaking with founders and fund managers, and the kind of key things that we've seen recently in a lot of roundtables, surveying, and our conversations is from a challenge perspective, and a lot of these, again, can be applied to most international markets off the continent, but fragmented navigation. Founders we've worked with, particularly as they've been through the full journey, say, the support stack's there, but it's really hard to navigate. Who are the public sector, private sector organizations we engage with? What are the best initiatives? And how do we really understand that? And there's no one really presenting or navigating that. Number two, visas, identity and banking friction. Great visa schemes here for entrepreneurial talent, but of late there's been bottlenecks and challenges. It's slowed down. We know setting up banks overseas is one of the biggest challenges, and there isn't a solution that's truly solving for that. Number three, incentive, eligibility, complexity. So education awareness around the tax incentive schemes like SCIS, EIS, how to apply for them. Again, there's been some changes in that have meant there's a bit of lag for African ventures from several markets getting their eligibility sorted out. Number four, uneven advisor quality. So we hear good stories, bad stories about advisory support. A lot of it's not necessarily negative about the support they're getting, but just the different tiers, costs of that support, and obviously translating what might be a reasonable cost to a UK scale-up versus an African scale-up with their capital and resources. Global competition shifting. If we were looking at these slides about 3, 4, 5 months ago, you would be a lot more favorable to the US and the Middle East, but obviously things are constantly shifting. We don't expect those things to be like that forever, but at the moment there is a lot of evolving dynamics. And then 6, post-program support gap. So what I mean by post-program support gap is when companies land and expand here in the UK, there is, again, if you find it, a lot of really good support initiatives and enablement, but often once you've gone through that, it's almost like going a bit out in the wilderness, and where is that follow-on support, particularly as they go into the scale growth kind of exit phase. So these were some of the key things we were getting feedback on the ecosystem. And so what we found was actually, how do you enable and support for that coming to the UK? So we said there was kind of 3 core components at that early stage. There's discovery, support, and landing. So how do you help an African founder, maybe working with their portfolio fund, to validate before committing, right? I think the key thing to say here is offshoring and accessing to markets is almost a necessity for all these companies in their markets rather than anything else. And so we talk about the value construction component coming to international markets. At the moment, the local markets can't capacitate that. So the question is, if they have to come offshore, and that's being driven by a number of stakeholders, how do we make sure that if that's going to happen, it's done in the most cost-effective way that best works for the founder, but also to make sure, is this the right time to do it? And is the UK the right market? So going through that discovery of the companies so they have a full understanding of global comparisons, but understand the timing and the best time to do it that's going to make most sense for the business. Second is support. So how do we then make sure they understand who are all those different organizations, who are all the different components that you need to plug into? Not to say you're going to leverage all of them, but again, painting that clear picture so you're confident in that final bit, which would be around landing. So how do you operationalize the business? Not just set up a holdco or a subsidiary that just lives here virtually, but how do you actually operationalize your business here in the market as a Go Global platform, or to raise capital and make sure that you're not just setting up and then you're not getting any attention or any of the support or any of the resources or investment that you need. Just to bring to life, like, well, where is all this information coming from? So alongside the initiatives we run, we do a lot of work with the public and private sector. So just in the last 4 months alone, but extrapolate this tenfold, we've been doing sessions and programs here in the UK, working with Nigerian, Kenyan, South African stakeholders, coming into the UK to talk with stakeholders here. We were recently hosting Kerry Smith, the Investment Director General for the UK government, across several African markets to have roundtables with fund managers and scale-ups, both those looking to come to the UK, but those who've already been on that journey to understand how does the UK government better support them, and that would filter down to different departments. Last year, we had the Mayor of London with the trade missions over to the continent with UK scale-up, so looking at the other way. And then below here, several other engagements, particularly around the kind of exit side of things and the public market side of things, working with London Stock Exchange and others, Lancaster House with the African Development Bank. So really looking everything from entry to scale to exit and all the public and private sector organizations to help them understand what do African founders and fund managers need, but also to help them understand who else is doing what within that kind of growth continuum, and so they can all hopefully play more concentrated roles where it matters. And so that really has led to the work we're trying to do. We're not trying to go deep in any of those sections. We're trying to create that glue to make that pathway of entry, scale, and exit viable via the UK, but also make the most sense and be the most beneficial to those founders. And that's where our UK Africa Sandbox comes along. So the UK Africa Sandbox, currently founded a Funder Sandbox, but we're rebranding it to UK Africa Sandbox, is effectively a platform initiative that looks to be that glue across that entire continuum from entry to scale to exit, and helping those founders validate, and then when they come into the UK market, help them along that journey by proverbially holding their hand, but really making sure they're speaking to the right people at the right time so that they can get the most out of the journey. But equally, how do we help the public and private sector here, who often are not fully focused on Africa, they have small budgets and resources towards it, so they can maximize their input to make the most value to the founders, but also build their cases back into their organizations, their departments, for why this makes sense and matters. And then finally wrap that together to tell that story around, if you need to come offshore, this is why or how the UK might be the best journey for you, and we make it to make the most sense, highest ROI for you, and allow more people to participate in that journey. So do that through 4 simple things: end-to-end coordination of the support side and the kind of journey you go through. Ecosystem alignment, help others understand who's doing what so people can double down on the things that make most sense for them rather than feeling the need to do a lot more, which is often the case. Market entry sprints is where we'll work with those founders to go deep and long through the process. And then finally, on continent presence. We have myself based down in South Africa, but we have various advisors and fractional teams across the continent. So we're actually on the ground working with those companies in their market before coming, and then we bring a lot of trade missions and other stakeholders into the markets to have those early conversations. So what that looks like from our support stack is kind of fourfold. We have firstly pipeline. This is where we do the sourcing engagement on content, speaking with the fund managers, the founders, really helping them understand before they ever even think about setting foot in the UK, what the opportunity is and is it right for them and can support them. Then we take them through the entry, scale, exit continuum. So entry, that landing and setting up and make sure it's done efficiently and correctly once the opportunity is validated. Scale, accessing capital and growth opportunities, and then exit routes, whether it be via acquisition, public markets. And at each of those stages, we have a series of different public and private sector partners that participate and go deep with them on the key components that help them along the journey. And hopefully we can bring more into that continuum as we go along and be able to tell that narrative and story of that full continuum. In terms of just to give an idea, bring it to life, because we have been doing this, I just want to give a South Africa snapshot to give you an idea. So the last 2 years through the sandbox, as we've been developing and growing it, we've worked with 16 South African startup scale-ups to come into the UK. 5 of those who have got onto the UK government's Global Entrepreneur Programme, which is their global programme to bring the best tier scale-up founders into the UK. So we had 5 slots allocated to founders from South Africa. Alumni include Zimmy Charge, which is in the EV charging fleet space, Newform Foods, which is producing lab-grown meats and alternatives, Float, think buy now, pay later for Klarna, but instead of new lines of credit, they work with your existing credit to make sure you don't default on payments and better manage that, and Plentify in the kind of smart climate homeware space. Give you an idea of what that means for some of these companies. I'd take Newform Foods. That's a business that realized to have the growth they needed to be offshore, setting up in the UK, becoming SCAS and EIS compliant to raise capital, and have just launched a physical site up in Lincolnshire where they're going to be growing lab meat here and use that as their go global basis. So not just London, but the UK as well. And think that extrapified, we've gone on that journey, these companies, to take them on that journey, and they're still on that long journey. But in addition to that kind of practical piece, when we talk about markets on the continent, the reality is London shouldn't be the home for South African companies. Hopefully, in the long term, South Africa will be the home for South African companies. Nigeria will be the home for Nigerian companies. And a part of that is we work on the policy side of things. This isn't something we proactively do it, but it's become as a result of the work we're doing. So 2 policy case studies we had in South Africa. The South African Reserve Bank has control over companies going offshore with IP, raising capital, and it creates a lot of limitations and worries for companies that are getting assessed by them. So a working group from the Startup South Africa Steering Act Committee have created their own sandbox with the South African Reserve Bank to make it easier for these companies to go offshore, but we continue to maintain building IP onshore, even if it's owned offshore, and then get money back into the country a lot easier at points of exit. Now, this is a working policy piece that's being tested out, but we've been able to work with them to say, well, the UK can give you the soft landing that will try and work with you long term to make sure that works out. So how we can actually use something like our sandbox to inform the UK government on a policy level and an ecosystem level to better help capacitate long term those markets to become their own homes for these things, and the UK to become that long-term kind of go global partner. Another piece is around the SCIS, EIS policy. A consortium of investors and lawyers have put something together around how do you have a subsidiary here that can leverage SCIS, EIS. It's a long shot, but the point is these things are being looked at and discussed, and equally now that's helping them think about their own policies back in South Africa as well. So beyond just physically working these companies, we're actually looking at how do we build those relationships with the local markets to better capacitate them as well. And so we physically do this through several interventions. We have an online resources library of materials. We do webinars online to help with that early validation and understanding. Office hours, we do one-to-one sessions with companies and basically build them a market entry report saying if you do come to the UK, here's what you might want to approach and do, or if you shouldn't, this is why we don't think you can. Then we get deeper into the sprints, we're taking the end-to-end journey, and then we also do layer 5, we bring trade missions to the UK with founders and others, and every year we do an annual summit in London Tech Week called the UK Africa Sandbox, where we bring this whole thing to life under one day. And that's really kind of where our next step is. We're building up to that London Tech Week activation, which might be an opportunity for people here in the room. So as most of you know, London Tech Week, huge event, 500 plus events and active engagements through that week, 100,000 plus people here in London, but less than 1%, and it's a lot less than 1%, is either Africa focused or Africa enabling. And what we found are the challenges, having worked on several London Tech Weeks to support founders from the continent, is founders arrive without a roadmap. It's a big, complex week, and again, often Africa is not the spotlight. So knowing where are the opportunities for these founders when they land here in that week. Africa-focused organizations are really, really stretched. There's only few people out there doing things, or those organizations that are supporting are often 10% of their time's on Africa. So in that week, actually Africa is just not the priority because they've got their other priority markets or home markets, so they have limited time to engage. And finally, you run the risk of entrepreneurial tourism. You bring founders who are too early into the ecosystem, who've applied for a program, they come here and it's a great week, but there's no real tangible market entry opportunities just because they're simply not ready. Doesn't mean they're a bad company, just means it's not a right timing for them to be here. So we've really thought about this over the last couple of years and how we kind of solve for that or make it a more appropriate week for these founders. And 3 years ago, we did through the London Africa Network, the non-profit community that brings the Keystone here together, a Africa-focused mixer in London Tech Week. Went down really well, the founders found it valuable, but it was 3 hours, drinks, it wasn't enough. So then 2 years ago, in this very space, and last year, we brought together the UK Africa Ecosystem Day. So expanding on that evening mixer, we brought several support organizations into this space in different rooms, brought the founder delegations in and said, over the course of the day, you're going to have one-to-ones, office hours of all these support organizations, and it should help you to build your kind of market entry stack, but you're having tangible conversations with the individuals and organizations that can actually help you beyond the week. And we scaled that up last year. And now this year, we're very proud to announce that we are expanding that further. So we're doing the London Africa Tech Week. This is actually the first time we're kind of formally or informally kind of announcing it, but we're expanding on that one-day event. And so what we're doing is we're working very closely with the Department of Business and Trade, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and London partners to help create a coordinated package for African founder delegations that are coming from across the continent. As part of that, these delegation founders will get guaranteed VIP full access passes for London Tech Week. As part of that, we will also provide them a full pre-London Tech Week orientation masterclass where we talk them through the week, how to best engage, do your research, plug and play into different people. We will have a welcome reception at the Africa Centre on the Sunday night where we actually give the VIP pass to the founders so they do not have to queue on the Monday to get access to everything. And then we have a concierge support where for each delegation, we're designing the week curated to them. Here's the best rooms to be in for you. Here's who you should be engaging with. And then that will run into and conclude with our UK Africa Ecosystem Day on the Wednesday, which is where we have that full support stack rolled out for them that allows them to spend the rest of the week just focused on building relationships and that broader networking. And we have one or two more components I can't announce yet that we're just waiting for confirmation on that are going to make this an even more impactful week for these founders and these delegations. So as you can see there, what we're really trying to do is we're just trying to unify and align in a very practical way the ecosystem and hopefully allow these founders to get more out of the UK if it's the right market for them, but also as well allow support organizations, investors to find the best way for them to plug in to that and then hopefully wrap that in a clear narrative that helps founders better understand the UK market and compare it to other global contemporaries. And then finally, informing government on the best practice they can do to support those founders, but equally to partner and champion with the local markets these founders come from. So I'll just conclude there. The ask would be really if the sandbox is something relevant to you as a founder or a partner or an investor, please do get in touch. We're happy to chat. If the London Tech Week activities are something relevant to you, you'd like to engage and get involved in, come and have a chat. The whole idea is here, we just want to connect the dots around what we're doing. Obviously, funding is great. We want more funding, but we don't really need funding. We've sorted that out. We just need in-kind support from the ecosystem and ultimately founders leaning in. So as I say, I'm going to have to run off after our panel, but all of my details will be shared. And keep an eye out. We'll be formally announcing the London Tech Week activities online after Easter, and then we'll be relaunching the UK Africa Sandbox at a yet-to-be-announced event before London Tech Week as well. But yeah, just want to say thanks, Dan, for giving me the opportunity and time. I hope that was valuable, and yeah, look forward to continuing the conversation and supporting this ecosystem as it grows. Thank you.